Tried to make you immortal.
You tried to make me a killer!
You are a killer.
Hey, how's it going, my friends? This is Nick from the Nerd Frenzy Podcast. And today we are talking about the 80s classic, The Lost Boys. And we get to share it with my sister, Keaton, everyone.
Hello. Always good to be on the show.
I always do left-handed whenever I first do everything because whenever I mess up and I bump into my mic and I have to restart over again, so I'll go like, 1 second. So I go back and forth. So if you ever like pay attention, like you'll see like I kind of start up high because I'm trying to dodge it. But Keaton, today we get to talk about something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Amazing movie in 1987, The Lost Boys.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of watching it just to kind of get a refresher last night, and so many details and little things that I didn't even notice, because I think the last time I saw it I was either a very young adult or a kid, so it's
Just
been a
a
long
wee
time
laddie.
since I've seen this movie. Yeah. So there were quite a few things, and the way the movie started out was I was so excited because that I think it's called "Cry Little Sister,"
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not positive. But that song starts off right in the middle, and there's this aerial view of the pier, or the roller coaster and everything.
The boardwalk.
And I was like, oh, this is gonna be good.
Mm-hmm. It starts off with "Thou shalt not fall," and in any movie where you hear a chorus of little kids singing, it's always going to be either very creepy or very empowering or whatnot. And it nailed in this. And the funny thing, Keaton, about that song is I that's probably that and a couple other things are probably the most important elements that make this movie so grounded. And the crazy thing about this one is it has its cheesy 80s thing, but it has a lot of just, I don't know, heart and stuff going on. The relationship between Michael and Sam is I felt it. It felt like there's parts when they're just chasing each other around, the house, and they're being silly and goofy, and you immediately get bonded with the characters, and then you don't want anything to happen to them, and then this craziness starts happening. It was a fun movie.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And there's the typical brothers, the siblings, like annoyance thing that happens, but the love comes through. Like there's still that, but he's my brother. I mean, the two nerds from the comic book store
The
was
Frog
very
Brothers.
Yeah. They both when one of them was giving direction as to how to deal with his vampire brother, he's like, and then you got to drive a stake through his heart. Like something like very nonchalantly, he's like, it's my brother.
Yeah, and I guess they were told by the director Joel Schumacher they want him to both act like Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone in specific movies and act like a cocky. So that's what whatever 12, 13-year-old kid, that's what it looks like to them to do, is to walk around like, yeah, we must kill him. Corey Feldman, he's great, of course, at everything. So.
Oh yeah, I wonder if that's why he wore the bandana around his head, because that was a big Chuck Norris thing.
Yeah, it was a big Chuck Norris thing, and funny enough, a Sylvester Stallone thing in Rambo.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yeah, there were so many things in this movie that were so. I mean, I just had a really hard time not laughing out loud because they're the little touches of the over the top kind of corny things But then there were a ton of very serious, obviously dark, like the way they depict the vampires is a way that they don't do that in other, they don't do that in other films with vampires. So that's something that super, super cool watching it again, not realizing how scary and creepy the vampires are.
Joel Schumacher wanted the vampires to actually have a specific prosthetic that was used pretty much after that, like Buffy, the TV show and whatnot. They used the exact same idea because they thought it was just the idea that you're not necessarily just changing your eye color and you have fangs, you are turning into an actual monster, and that's what their goal was. And then they had, which I think was very effective. And in fact, a lot of it, watching it again, and Joe Schumacher was homosexual, and when you watch the movie, you see a lot of elements of homoeroticism between Michael and David, and there's certain like elements of back and forth between that everyone's always saying his name Michael like very seductively, and there's a very
Yeah.
sexual, playful nature. And watching it now, it was pretty relevant and a little obvious, but it was a good way of kind of putting out this sexual energy between all the characters and doing it successfully.
I noticed that, but it was so for me because I didn't know all of that. It was more subtle, but I noticed it, and I thought I didn't know if this was something because there was a few moments where Kiefer Sutherland character and Michael were in like his character would say something to Michael, and it would be like borderline. Is he flirting with like
Hmm.
he's being almost sexual, flirty kind of. But this is a cool vampire guy that's got the the is protective of his this woman, and so there's all these aspects that. But I noticed that, and didn't I didn't know if I was reading into something or if that was there. But there were little subtleties throughout, especially like from the vampires,
Hmm.
um, the other characters. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's super interesting.
it's something that I've read. She's been writing more. I don't think she's written too many lately, but Anne Rice, she's very big into her main characters. A lot of vampires, they're always very intimate around each other and very. It didn't matter which
Mhm.
male or female. Or it didn't it didn't matter what you were. There's a very sexual attraction to, like, whenever you see Louis and, jeez, what's his name? Arm Armand. So when you see Brad Pitt and Antonio Banderas in Interview the Vampire, that I mean they were extremely obvious about that sexual tension, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
I think it's just a specific, might be a specific charm too, just being a vampire. There's some kind of thing going on, but then they started, and which funny enough, this kind of progressed into something else. But initially, we were going to talk a little bit about Twilight, another vampire movie, and I was about ready to say how this movie does that sexual tension correctly, where the other one was kind of odd. But my
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree for sure.
But
Yeah, there were a few things that I kind of made note of that I'd mentioned that made me super happy or just laugh. And one of them you actually put on, you ended up without us even talking about it, you put it on the kind of cover picture of this podcast, but the saxophone playing, singing man. I was watching it and was literally laughing out loud. Like, is this guy trying to be in the WWF? He's all oiled up.
uh-huh.
He's singing and then has a saxophone as well. And I was like, this is the coolest. Like, and everyone in the crowd is obviously digging it. So I was like, this is so cool. Oh
So
my gosh.
about 15 years ago, I remember looking up this guy because I thought there was a very odd appeal about him. Like you can't necessarily take your eyes off him, even though you're thinking, first of all, why they even like have him in here for 45 minutes in the first place, and second of all, why am I captivated by him in the first place? And there's like a whole music video going on around him, but he actually was the saxophone player for all of Tina Turner's songs. So it was actually he's
Oh,
kind of actually a big deal. And that
that's
song,
so
yeah,
cool.
this way he chose that song. It wasn't his song, but he chose it and he covered it and he kind of just added that 80s spin to it. And that's all him. And then I guess he was doing push-ups in between takes because he wanted to just look good for the
Look,
movie, which I get
oh
it.
my
I mean,
gosh.
that's why I look as good as I do now. I'm doing push-ups before and after.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that part was the first part that I went back and I watched a couple times. So I was like, look at this guy, he's killing it.
I
And
know.
everybody's super into it.
It was more.
Oh my
There was
gosh.
more sex going on with him and that saxophone than the whole rest of the movie.
I know. Oh my gosh. It was there. It was super fun to watch. I mean, there are little things like that. Another is I'm just assuming too that a pier area, the boardwalk, that's just like bumping every night. That's just a happening place because I feel like there was always a ton of people, and there were a few nights that they went there and they were hanging out.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It's so what happened, I guess, they filmed the whole thing in Santa Cruz, but they couldn't call it Santa Cruz because they were calling it the murder capital of the world, which funny enough, Santa Cruz was being labeled as that, but they said in order to film in Santa Cruz, we want you to call it something different. So they call it Santa Clarla, and just because they could get away with doing that. But yeah, they did all the filming in Santa Cruz at that boardwalk, and you just kind of see a lot of natural reactions going on because that was them filming, B footage, just a lot of people dancing around, and then you'd see they'd splash over to Michael staring at Star, and then they'd go back over at Star, and then you just see everyone else is kind of just they probably like this gave threw a bunch of ecstasy at everyone, and just you see a bunch of people being very progressive, especially the saxophone player. And but no,
oh my gosh.
the whole thing though it has the movie has a very especially that part it has a very odd pull to it. The movie starts with people are strange when you're a stranger, and
Yeah.
I know that song, of course, as The Doors, but you hear it in there and it's describing this town. You've seen all these odd people, and it's just kind of a nice little thing to foreshadow, like, yeah, there are some strange people, and you're about ready to see some very strange ones here soon. And then the movie has even though it does have that 80s feel, it's an 80s feel where you're like, oh, good, I love this retro thing, and I love how there's certain things that these guys have done that is still being used to this day because it was so effective 35 years
Yeah.
ago.
Uh, oh my gosh. Because this movie came out in '87. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
80, yeah. Jeez. 34 years old this year. Crazy. I yeah. A couple other things with Diane West. That's her name, right? The mom.
Diane
She
Wiest.
Weist. Is that how you pronounce her name properly? Oh.
Wiest.
Oh, my bad. I apologize.
It's okay, she won't be
And
watching this.
when she takes, finds the lost boy at um, the boardwalk and brings it into the store where that gentleman's working, the head vampire.
Max.
And yes, and I thought it was the funniest thing that he like rewarded her with a sucker. I was like, he's got suckers for this particular thing right here. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
The
he's trying to
little
make
things
her
like that.
sucker.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he was trying to make her eventually a bloodsucker with him.
Oh, I I still don't fully understand the whole way it works as far as, had he not been able to have any control over Michael or that family, had he not invited him into the house, like, did that actually give some sort of control over to him? Because he mentioned, the man of the house has to invite me in for me to be welcome here or something like that. And then they kind of went back to it at the end of the movie, like, you shouldn't have like welcomed me or allowed me into your home, like you did this by doing that. Is that actually the way the story tells it? Is that kind of how it works? You have to actually get permission.
It was I know it was an '80s thing, but there was a lot of times when, like, Fright Night did the same thing, where he was a neighbor and he saw him do that stuff, and he's trying to tell on him, and then he goes to he's inside his house when he goes back home the next day from school, and his mom's like, yeah, he came in, and I brought him in, and showed him around, and I was like, ooh, and you see him look at him and like, ooh. But yeah, I think they've been doing that a long time, and that's just one of the things. And it was kind of, I remember it was frustrating whenever Edgar and Alan were like, didn't you know? Oh, and he goes, silly boy, didn't you know that you render them powerless? And then they're like, didn't you know that? And like, yeah, of course. I'm like, well, and you can tell he didn't. And I'm thinking, well, I knew that, and I'm not a 14-year-old kid who owns a comic book store.
Oh man. Yeah, those two, the Frog Brothers, were a great duo together. They brought some comedic stuff to the movie, and also the bath time scene where he's like really going for it in the bathroom, like washing his hair. Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to take a bath now and put a ton of soap in my hair.
I know.
And sing super.
That looked like
Oh
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought, I don't know if my brother has ever asked me to get in the bath. Like, he directed him to, like, you need to take your bath now. And then there was a couple scenes where it went back to him singing, and I was like, yeah, he's killing it like the saxophone player.
Yeah, of course, this is the same director who directed Phantom of the Opera a little bit later, so it all makes sense.
Yes, the theatrics. And I loved that he made Sam, the younger brother, wearing very bright, like, loud clothes. And it was something I commented on. I just thought, well, that must just be the era that it's in. But even whenever he went to the comic store the first time, one of the brothers was like,
"Where you from?" Yeah.
Yeah, made fun of his shirt he was wearing, or said something commented about what he was wearing, and I was like, oh, I guess it is. It's not just because it's the 80s; it's because he is dressed like a dork or whatever.
And they were playing because they were in California, and he was from Phoenix. And I've lived in Phoenix, and I've lived in places in California, and I would say they both dress quite. In fact, I would say that Phoenix doesn't dress near as odd as California does. So that was kind of an odd thing to say, especially when it shows in the beginning of the whole movie. It shows all these odd looking dressed people, and then all of a sudden this guy goes, "You're all dressed all weird," and the guy was just not. I mean, not really. He was just very 80s, but he was just wearing. The other guy was just wearing a red bandana and just like
I know.
and he's like, "Oh yeah, what a weirdo you are." I was like, okay. But he got him back though. He got him back because he was like, "Oh, well, you can't put the Superman 25s with the 420s. He hasn't even discovered Krypton yet." And I was just like, "Oh, got him."
Yeah, I was glad that they put those little, like, very specific pieces of the comics in there where I don't know if it's actually true to those comics, but I'm glad that they put those little things in there to kind of show how big of a nerd Sam is. Yeah.
Well, and the reason why this movie also has a very Goonies feel to it, and even has Corey Feldman, is the director of Goonies was actually going to direct this, but then ended up directing Lethal Weapon instead, but stayed on as executive producer. And then when Joel Schumacher came on board, they pretty much kind of took that Goonies feel and made it about Goonies versus vampires kind of thing.
Oh,
But
that's funny.
and this whole thing actually, Keaton, and it kind of all makes sense. They just changed a couple people's names, but some people's names they didn't even change. This is actually a very dark adaptation from Peter Pan.
Oh,
It's something that
yeah.
uh, it's one of
I
those
mean, the
things.
Lost Boys.
Never grow up. Yep, never grow up. And originally was supposed to be the actual age of like the kids of the Goonies when they're all supposed to be 12 years old instead of 16, 17, 19. And what happened was they just decided to up the age a little bit and turn it from a PG to like a PG-13 just from the content of whatnot, and then elevated certain, like I said, certain sexual energy between the vampires and whatnot, and then added a kick-ass modern '80s soundtrack from a lot of the most popular bands and time, of that time, and actually,
Yeah.
and actually, one of the bands, NX, which is. Uh, I need you tonight, bum bum bum. But that got, the only reason why Kiefer Sutherland was going to be on the movie is because he heard that NX was going to do a original song and so he wanted to be associated with it.
Oh,
But and I will say, just talking about this whole thing, I would say that Kiefer Sutherland is the best thing about this movie.
yeah. He he's very hard not to be drawn to when you're watching him. Um, and even the parts that are kind of corny, they're not really when he's in the scene. I mean, the things that he's saying, because he's so cool and he's so like serious, and they've got their dirt bikes, and I mean, I was like, this is so cool. And even though he's so it's so like screams 80s, he's still so cool. He's got the hair and everything he's wearing, and just like the look on his face. He's always just
He's a good actor, and even though he's been kind of labeled for a while now as kind of a B movie actor, back in the '80s and '90s, he was one of the most sought after people. He was in Young Guns and Stand by Me, Flatliners. He was one of the main leads for a while, and then all of a sudden he kind of just he the caliber of his acting stayed the same, but everything else kind of, like, the quality of his movies weren't very good. But then luckily enough, he kind of got onto the whole TV show 24, and it kind of, that was whenever TV shows were just starting to like get actually better, and he was one of the first generation people to major actors to kind of step into the TV role and let it kind of transform it to what it is today. So a little pioneer, one of those guys. But and of course his dad, Donald
yeah,
Sutherland. Donald Sutherland's been kicking ass for many years himself.
yeah. I can't picture his dad.
You would
What
know
was
he was the bad guy in the Hunger Games, the old man,
Oh, yeah.
Donald
Oh my
Sutherland.
gosh,
Yeah.
that's crazy. Wow, that's crazy. They look a lot alike. That's crazy. Um, yeah, the another thing that is ahead of its time, like we talked about a little bit with the makeup and stuff, but there's the aerial views that they had. There were a lot of aerial views, like a lot of stuff where they would have had, you could see the whole town, or just the views from the bridge, and the super cool effect of when Michael's up on the ceiling.
Oh
There's
man,
all
and
these
he's
things.
freaking out and he's scared and he's Help me,
Yeah.
Sam, help me. Yeah, that is just. There's a lot of things going on in this movie where you could tell that there was a lot of bonding going on beforehand. And I guess Corey Feldman said that they would take him to the Broadway to, hang out and have a good time, and you ride the rides and whatnot, enjoy the atmosphere. And there's a lot of they did that with all the actors, and that's kind of a thing that they've been doing. But it was something that worked very well. And then the two Corys, Corey Haim, Sam, and Corey Feldman,
Mm.
they became best friends in real life and ended up being in like 7 movies together afterwards, which all of them pretty much were garbage, but they were buddies, and it was pretty cool to see.
I didn't know that. What year around did Stand by Me come out?
That was 86.
Okay, so that had just so and that I don't know if it was popular right when it came out. It's obviously known to be a good movie now. So that was right after he'd already done that.
It
And
was
he
it was popular. It was popular because Stephen King wrote it, so it was already,
Oh, okay.
yeah. To hear
Yeah, I
just
didn't
from
know.
that.
Yeah, that he was like a I mean, he played that role really well too. Um,
Kiefer Sutherland's done a lot of really good. I'd say his villain roles too. There's been roles like in Time to Kill, he played a KKK guy, and he was so convincing. And you see him always play these hard edged people, and it feels very like, oh yeah, you must be a real big uh, you know jerk in real life. But it just then you see him in movies and TV shows that he's a good guy, and it's believable too. So yeah, I've always liked him though. 80s and 90s when I watched him in Young Guns, he played Doc, and he was very good. Him and Emilio Estevez had a very good chemistry, and it was a lot of people were very good, but a lot of people forget that Kiefer Sutherland is kind of a big deal back in the day.
yeah, and I would say definitely not somebody that's talked up a lot. Like not an actor that comes up a lot in conversation, but um, is definitely underrated in that way. Where there's been there's been a few things that he's been in that have been excellent. Where he's been, he played his character super well, and he's the reason I would say that The Lost Boys is a loved movie. I would say he's one of the top reasons why people love The Lost Boys, because the other vampires, even, they're cool and they've got their own things too, but they're kind of just in the background the whole time.
Hmm.
And I mean, even the guy with the super blonde, curly, obnoxious hair didn't catch my attention as well, but just hanging upside down, I was like, that hair is hanging and it's beautiful.
Goldilocks, yeah, yeah. And then the
Yeah.
other the Marco, the little one. Funny enough, just it was a year. It would have been 2 years, I believe. After that, he starred in a little movie called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, playing Bill.
Oh, yeah. I was like, I know he's in something else, and I didn't take the time to look, but I knew he was in something else with the same curly blonde hair, just less of it. Oh
Right.
my gosh!
No, but
But
it's a good time. I was growing up. I was born in '84, so I probably started remembering watching movies, and mom and dad let us watch whatever we wanted to for the most part. And I remember watching these kind of movies when I was 5 or 6 years old. So late '80s, early '90s is probably that's whenever I started like really like studying things and like, whoa, this is crazy. This guy's scaring me. Wow, this actor is really good. And that's whenever I started noticing these kind of things. And Lost Boys was one of those that was and still is one of my favorite experiences. And if I had to rank it into the like top vampire movies of all time, I would say it's for sure top three, and uh, definitely top three, and maybe top two.
oh yeah, I mean, besides Twilight, right?
Twilight's number one. Uno.
Yeah, I am. a little bit younger than you, so I didn't. I I remember growing up and not fully grasping the whole. Obviously, I grasp it much better now, but I remember it being super scary. It was one of those movies that I would for sure go to bed and have nightmares if I went to bed right after watching that movie because of the way that their face changed and the way like in their eyes and everything. um I remember it being like up there with Freddy Krueger and like
That's
just
cute.
because I mean the makeup and everything that they did was really well done. And but I definitely appreciated it in a different way. It was a scary one.
There were a lot of like I still to this day will talk to anyone, and I know '80s has this weird negative association with quality of movies and music, especially music. I would say a lot of people would say the music in the '80s was like the worst time, but I've always felt like there's a specific kind of charm about the '80s that no one else has ever possessed, and funny enough, a lot of that charm is coming back. So it's the joke's on you, but there's a certain kind of element that happened in the '80s with movies in general, and with fantasy movies especially. Any kind of fantasy or horror, there was some certain kind of elements that were incorporated that incorporate. And now the directors that we have to this day, the important ones, their influences were the ones growing up also in like the '80s too. So it's very important when you see these effects done, and then you're still seeing it done to this day. Like this prosthetics, the monster prosthetics they used for Kiefer and whatnot, they were so good and convincing. I remember the close-ups at the very end of the movie whenever they're fighting, and whenever Kiefer's up there in like the little attic in the cabin, and he's like in the shadows, and he's talking to Michael, and he like quickly flies by and punches Michael and knocks him down, and then finally Michael looks back up and he's in vampire form, and then they're both kind of looking at each other, and then they start flying at each other, and it was
Yeah.
so interesting how they did it, and what you would want to see, and then you kind of see if once that movie came out, and vampire movies after that, they had that same kind of flair where they're like, oh yeah, we need to have this kind of thing happen, and the movie stands up.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. And I mean, there is something about the '80s that if you were to stereotype the '80s, there are a lot of fads and things that were very like regarded as corny now. And so a lot of people immediately, because corny, they immediately associate that as a negative thing instead of kind of appreciating it for what it is. Like, I mean, I was watching the movie with Michael, my boyfriend, last night, which made all of these moments where they're like chanting his name so much more magical. And that part that they were like egging him on, and I kind of thought, well, this is kind of corny. They're literally chanting his name, but I just thought, no, in that position, there's not one teenager that wouldn't give in to doing whatever the heck they wanted him to do if they had all these people chanting for him.
Especially
But
whenever the woman that is sitting there watching this whole thing, and he's trying to impress
yeah,
her, and
yeah.
he's also trying to. It's obvious that he's looking at these guys. They have real motorcycles. He has a dirt bike. There's obviously the guys that like, oh, these are the guys right here, and then so he's trying to be play it off like these are the guys to be cool in front of, and first of all, whenever David, aka Kiefer, lets him punch him, and then he just kind of just allows it. I'm just thinking like, ooh, look at that! You're allowing it, but anyone else, you would have been eating their face off right now. And then you find
Oh,
out, later on in the movie right after when Star and Michael go into the cave and then have sex, and then they talk about how she was actually supposed to kill Michael right then and there, but and that was supposed to be
oh
her
yeah.
first, and then she was gonna be a full vampire at that point, but it didn't happen because she's fallen in love with him, and it was all it was you could see it was all a setup, but one thing though I didn't necessarily get is the thing like with it seems to me like Max was able to like he was doing all these things where no one was watching him, like at his house, for example. This is one right here that confused me. At his house, there's a kite that gets thrown at him, and it's like a bat, and he looks at it, and he's looking around, and he can hear the motorcyclists, all the guys doing their thing, and that's obviously to let us know, the audience, oh, this is not the bad guy. But then when you find out he is the bad guy, then you're thinking there was a couple scenes when you did that, and there was really no reason to it. Now I'd understand you did that at your store because you're putting that thing out like you're a good guy and these guys are punks. But the fact that like when you're at your own home and there's no one watching you, and you're acting like all like weird and scared that your boys are just doing their little mischievous things, I didn't get that.
Yeah, and I thought the exact same thing because I thought, I mean, the mom wasn't even there. Like nobody was over to see the show that was being put on. So I actually wondered that also. And maybe they explain this and I just totally missed it. But why is he able to, all of the things that vampires are, the garlic thing and the reflection and all of that, how come he was able to get past all of the tests that the boys were throwing at him during dinner that night?
Because he was rendered powerless whenever he let him in.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
See, now it makes so much more sense because I thought that doesn't make sense either. So he's the head vampire in that town. I mean, he's like the one that started it all, and then the Lost Boys are the ones that he infected or had them, and they only became full once they had their first kill.
Mm-hmm. Which obviously he probably picked a few punks on purpose because they didn't probably have a problem with something like that. Obviously, you look at someone like Kiefer, especially when you see him throughout the movie, you can see he's kind of a prick anyways. So he probably was like that whenever he was found. But I'm guessing the way that the original tale of the Peter Pan is they were kind of a rough bunch. And when you see that they actually wanted to kill Wendy for a real killer and drown her and all these things because they didn't want her there and whatnot, and they were willing to go through it, but Peter Pan was not allowing that. This is one of those things. They're very much using small samples from the thing. In fact, Michael is actually would have been the top hat, eldest son, and I'm not sure if they're trying to imply that David or that Max is supposed to be Peter Pan. But in many versions of the Peter Pan, I think maybe even one of the original version, which a lot of those old nursery rhymes are pretty damn scary. But I think that they actually it's actually a much darker version of that where they are kind of like these little hellion kids who are just going around and doing a lot of bad things. And like to Tiger Lily, I don't think that they were very nice to Tiger Lily in the original thing, but I think that they were trying to just go off of that, but make it with at the time would have been a more modern, contemporary piece. Where like, hey, let's make a retelling, loose version of Peter Pan, but make them all vampires. And like I said, it was supposed to be kind of a Goonies meets vampires, which eventually became a movie called Monster Squad, which is another 80s movie that is a lot of fun, but definitely not near as, I would say, quality as Lost Boys is, but it's still a fun 80s horror movie.
We're the Monster Squad.
In the darkest night, the forces of evil come out to fight.
There are a lot of tries there, and I think that there were just so many hits that still this day is very lucky that they came from the 80s movies.
Oh yeah, and Lost Boys innately is that they are a chaotic bunch that kind of raised themselves and their hellions. I mean, so it makes so much sense whenever you think of them in the Lost Boys, like the Peter Pan Lost Boys, because they don't have a mother. I mean, they don't have anybody telling them what's right and wrong. They don't have all of these things that Wendy, tells them, like, you don't have anyone to read you stories and tuck you in at night and, give you a bath and all, like, all, whatever. But obviously the full grown adult version where there's these, I don't know. I mean, they're depicted as teenagers or very young adults, but they're obviously vampires that we don't know exactly how old they are, but so they've been wreaking havoc for a long time, as far as we know.
There was a couple deleted scenes or additional ending scenes or whatever that shows Max in the early 1901 or something like that, and he's hanging out, like standing there, like with like a little funny smile on his face, or something like that, implying he's been doing it. I think they had like a whole like Shining kind of ending, but they didn't use it for some reason. But I thought that they should have, because I do feel, especially watching it now, and I remember kind of feeling a little bit back in the day. David and Michael's fighting scene was great, and then when they had the big baddie come, he kind of just easily got killed on accident by Grandpa, who just came in, and then just spear happened to be flying through there and hit him directly in the heart and kill him. And I remember thinking that was kind of a silly, stupid thing that I don't like seeing in certain movies. I remember watching True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and at the very end of the movie, he's him and his wife are killing all his people, and she's kind of standing there, and then she gets handed the gun and she drops it, and the gun falls and starts shooting everyone and kills every single person around. And anyone who knows anything about guns, first of all, it's not possible. But then the idea that it killed every single person while just flying up in the air and stuff, it was like, guys, you had a pretty decent movie, and then you just did something stupid like that. But the 80s movies are one of the worst for doing that kind of stuff too. So
Yeah, I mean, I was, before you brought him up, I was like, I'm going to bring up the grandpa, because he was such a bizarre addition. And
yeah, it was.
Why he kept bringing the stuffed animals to Sam's room, and why, like, he refused to drive his car. Like, they got in the car and they were going to go into town and they didn't. I mean,
why he thought it'd be funny to act like he was dead when you first see him in the movie.
Yeah. I know, and the kids, one of the kids goes,
Sam,
if he's dead, can we go back? Yeah, can we go back to Phoenix if he's dead? Like, geez.
I know. I was like, wow. And he just heard you say that, and then he says, "Oh, I'm playing dead, and apparently doing a good job." And I'm thinking, if I was you, Grandpa, I'd be like, "Ooh, that hurts the heart a little bit." But
yeah,
luckily, the rest of the movie, there's a certain kind of love. There is a part when Michael kind of does this weird, like he gives a sexual remark to his grandpa about plowing the lady that he's stuffing the cat or dog for, and he made a sexual innuendo about having sex with the lady, and it was kind of just in bad taste. And even Sam was just like, "Why'd you do that, Michael? That was that there was no need for that." And Michael just kind of looks at him, because Michael's like, he's like half vampire, and he's like, "Oh, I'm now a pissy little piece of crap now. I'm gonna look at my mom, and she's gonna try to tell me what's going on. I'm just like, Mom, you don't understand." And the typical tropes that they use in all these movies. But for some reason, Lost Boys, and especially the way that they use "Cry Little Sister," and then at the end too, when as they throw David on there, and he sings like this. Thou shalt, and it was just it was very like, ooh, this is intense. I love this moment right now. It was, and it's a very vivid moment that when I think of quality just scenes that really that struck me to this day, where I still can vividly think about the exact like odd face Kiefer's making as he's dying, because I remember just being so entrapped in that moment watching the whole thing. And it's because he's looking at it and he's just, and then Michael's like looking at him, he's breathing heavily, and now shit. And the whole thing was just, and it, like everything was red, like a bill red haze in there. It was just very effective, but it was a fun movie, and I loved watching it again, and get to do a little recap on it. It was fun.
Yeah, and then the music, I think they played that song, just little pieces of it, like 3 or so times throughout the movie.
It is sampled,
it was so perfect. Because the beginning, it started right off in the middle, and there was another time where you could hear the voice, hear the deep. I don't know if it was like the beginning part or the one that they at the very end again, but they did little pieces of the song, and the soundtrack makes the movie really great too. I mean, I love a good soundtrack, and that song, I mean, I right after watching it, I added it to one of my playlists, because I was like, oh, this is a great song that I totally forgot about.
Yeah, the whole thing, the whole thing, just it's a fun little reminder too. Sometimes people say it's never a good thing whenever you can see a movie how it's aged, but there's certain qualities that I've always found with specific movies. Watching something like Jaws, and then watching something like Indiana Jones, and then watching something like Pulp Fiction, and you see a certain kind of thing going on, and it really is kind of an awesome way. And Lost Boys is an obvious look into an 80s movie when you're like, oh cool, I want to watch an 80s cult classic, and it's just a very good way back into the past to kind of just see what was cool, what worked, what didn't work.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole movie in itself is just a wonderful experience, watching it again and again, and getting something new from it, and now being past the age where I'm just sitting there going, you bunch of old rascals, kids, just get out of here and go do something, go hang out with your mom, she's a sweetheart of a lady. And it's funny how you kind of just got to go through all these things with them. But yeah, Keaton, I appreciate you talking vampires with me today.
Oh yeah, it's always a great time. And Lost Boys, I needed to watch that one anyway, so it was a nice recap. It was a nice time to be able to watch it again finally after all these years. So thank you.
Absolutely, my little sister, and don't cry, okay?
No,
because we will do a podcast again soon, okay? Don't cry, little sister. Well, thank you, Keith, for coming on as always, and we'll be talking about the next topic soon. And as always, I love you, and thank you for coming on, and thank you all for looking at all these podcast episodes with us, and I appreciate you guys' continued effort and watching and hopefully being entertained by us. And thanks for everyone. But thank you, Keaton, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a fun time.
Good times. All right. Well, take care. Take care, everyone. See ya.